So it's 2:15, and I think we should probably just thought it's the usual thing happened. We lost some people, but do stay on with us if you dare to join the mural experience. So Julie, do you want to sort of start it off?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. So yeah, this workshop session, we felt that the easiest thing to do was just have a way to gather your thoughts and so forth. And I hope most of you are back. And the mural, it just typically seems to be quite a simple one to use. So I hope you've got onto it. If you haven't, drop a note in the chat, but it's quite straightforward. I'm going to explain it in a moment and what we're going to do. Really what we want to do is just take this opportunity to give you a chance to think about all of this kind of from your own perspective. We all have these different perspectives. We're not going to demand anyone speaks. We will invite people to speak and all of that, but actually if you want to be quietly sipping tea and writing on a board, you can also do that. That's absolutely fine. So let me just share my screen if I can, if it will let me. Oh, does not like me doing these things. So, okay. So you will hopefully have already got to more, and I'll ask the RDS colleagues to shout if anyone's got any problems. But you will have noticed this will have taken you to a browser outside of Zoom. Leave Zoom on, but keep the browser, and hopefully you can do that. You won't need to look at the Zoom call while you're doing the mural, but just listen to what we're doing. And what we're going to do is myself, Claire and Candice are going to ask 3 questions in turn. And for each one, just only answer the question we're asking at the time, if you can. And as I said, the aim is really to give you a chance to think about how impact looks from you, from your point of view, and how it can be strengthened, and really kind of offer your insights, share insights, etc., etc. So it's a bit of a kind of sowing the seeds for yourself of thinking about how this can land best in your space. And for NIHR colleagues maybe to look at this takeaway and think how we can do this better, how you can do it better within NIHR. So this is mural. The screen you've got looks something like this, but just as a really quick guide, this is how easy it should be. You've got something that looks a bit like this with 3 questions across the top. If you double click anywhere on the page, you should get a post-it. You might have a random kind of animal name. It gives you that as a visitor sometimes, or like, you know, rabid penguin or something like that. If you are, don't take it personally. You can drag the corners to resize it, and you can drag it all over the place, and you can drag the board around. It's literally just drag, click, drag. Yeah, so there shouldn't be anything major on there. Any problems, just shout, but the idea is just to collect some ideas. Now, I said you have a random name. I'm going to start with the first question, and I invite you to put up any thoughts you have of what this looks like for you on that first column, the first question on the mural. And it's thinking about what impact looks like for you. So what changes do you want research to make in the world? What does that look like? You'll see I've put a kind of starter example on there, so that patients to be able to access care more quickly. That's just one of mine. What does it look like to you? What looks better? And just put as many things on as you can. I realise I can't see the mural board. What I will invite colleagues to do while I find that is, as things come up, have a think, have a shout about anything interesting coming up on there while I load it.
So over to everybody. I would like to encourage others outside the RDS also to join. I think so far I can see mostly members from within the RDS. No problem with that. But yes, as I say, I would really like to encourage you to give it a go.
What we'll do is we'll do a few minutes on each one. At the end, we'll have invite people to comment and chat and so forth. So do put down thoughts just so others can see them if nothing else. I'm just going to load it up on here. Bear with me. So people can't access it. I'll tell you what, if you're having an absolute mare of a time, put your thoughts in the chat, in the Zoom chat. If you're actually having a nightmare, just stick them in there and we will look for them in there. The joys, I should say, my slow cooker actually fused our system earlier and we had a power cut. So, you know, technical gremlins are there. Please do just put your comments in the chat to this first question. What does impact look like for you if you prefer to do it that way? And we will invite comments as well if you really can't do it. Right, joys of technology. Candice or anyone else, is there anything on there that's striking you at the moment?
And I think people are describing the benefits from having yes, sort of care that is evidence-based, which is my own comment. So people being able to make healthier choices.
I think to me it'll be improving the outcome. So whatever we are trying to do should be better than what was done, and looking what outcome we are getting. So that will be an impact. For example, if you invest in share market, you see that the outcome is that your money is increasing or decreasing, something like that.
I think your point is so well made that our line of sight, we had this when we did a lot of the reviewer development stuff, that the line of sight is to that benefit, that patient, that outcome at the end of the journey, with kind of changes in there. But that is a shared line of sight within NIHR, certainly it seems, within our clinical practice. So it's a really good anchor point actually for most of us, thinking about impact as these outcomes, these benefits to people.
And also I think it becomes, with the research, there's so much uncertainty. So if we have something shared outcome, it becomes that end point, and then people can work backwards rather than struggling to find forward journey.
I would absolutely agree with you. And I think one of the challenges we have for many of our colleagues, outside of health particularly, but also within, is this seeing how their work connects into this pathway. And someone put a point about in the chat around the challenges of impact that happens unexpectedly. And I think there's a balance point, isn't there, between impact that you kind of plan for and what happens unexpectedly, and how you are able to flex between those 2 points, because you don't always know. Anything else striking anyone on the board?
I think it's real time as well.
What,
so,
sorry?
Real time, pragmatic, which means when you're doing, you should see the benefit rather than waiting for years to see the benefit. And that's a problem with the research.
That's, yeah, it's a really interesting angle, because you bring that up, and Mark brought that up as well earlier, around the immediacy of the benefits we can have, and is that something that is a priority or not? Certainly outside of the clinical practice area, there's an acceptance it's a long drawn out process. Whereas, you know, if you're faced front and center each day with patients and so forth, you need something more immediate. And I think certainly what Candice and Claire were saying around the strategy, reflecting those different chronologies, the immediate, but also this longer term build, could be a really powerful thing to articulate. Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds more to throw some things up, and then I will hand over to Candice and Claire for the next question. We will come back to some comments as well. Okay, anything else you can think of, put up. We'll bring the mural up at the end as well to round up. Okay. Right, I'm going to close that question, and I'm going to move on to the next question, and to, I'm not sure it's Claire or Candice next.
It's me. So I touched on this in the presentation, and it's a key thesis of knowledge mobilization, is that active engagement with your stakeholders to drive impact. And it would be really helpful to sort of get underneath what does that look like for you, and what might we do to better support it. I gave my own sort of working hypothesis that we could be making better use of some of the infrastructure that's there that sort of has that engagement built in, but there may well be other reflections, and I can see people are already getting to it, so do just carry on and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Can I just ask, when you say we, do you mean us individuals, or do you mean we as NIHR?
Sorry, so yes, I think there's an NIHR issue, but it's to facilitate we as researchers. So I was being probably a bit loose in my talking there, but really this is about what could we NIHR be doing to facilitate those linkages that then you might benefit from? Does that make sense?
Yes, lovely. Thank you so much.
What have we got here?
And it's just reflecting on that question. It's been quite difficult, actually, hasn't it, to find a wording, because we is everyone, but we is also the community of NIHR. There's never an easy way to ask a question in the impact space. It's multi-level, multi this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, feel free if anyone needs to put it in a different way of we, but yeah, it's very difficult to demarcate, especially when most of the people doing in NIHR are also researchers or
I was going to
clinicians.
say everyone is wearing multiple hats, and I suspect
Exactly.
most of the people on this call could sort of describe themselves as clinicians, academics, NIHR folk, etc. So yes,
this is just the start of a bit of a thinking for people. This is not an audit. But sorry, Candice, you were going to explain things on the overall.
Can I ask a stupid question? What do you mean by academics and non-academics?
So that's my phrasing. So I will take the hit on that one. I'd not put researchers, so academics, those in the research space who are kind of doing the research with an academic hat on versus people kind of usually patients and things. But if you're a clinician, the bit of your active life as a clinician would be non-academic. The bit of your research hat would be the academic. It's not a fine line. It's not a thing. It's basically the researchy bit and the active bit.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, academics are the ones with the professors and doctors in front of their name, and non-academics are the ones below their education level. Is that
no? It's not education. It's the where. So I am an academic, but I'm also a patient. As an academic, I sit on the academic side. As a patient, I'm a non-academic. So I'm the recipient of that research. So an easier way to say this is, how do we connect research and practice? Maybe that would be the easier way to say this, because there's so many, like with the last question, there's so many dynamics. So if you translate that to connect research and practice, that would be an easier way to say it.
Okay. And to pick up on this suggestion here about a stakeholder database, which actually picks up on something I've thought about quite a lot. We're doing a lot of work in my centre about how you reach audiences, and what are some of the sort of pivotal points that would help you connect with different audiences. And it has occurred to me that it could be really helpful for researchers to have access to those sorts of findings. So that sort of really chimes for me with that particular thought. If what I've just said chimes with you, then that would be good to know. But it feels to me that we can assume that you automatically know how to get to key people, but you may not. I mean, and who are the sort of influencers on social media, say, in a particular area? Not always apparent to everyone. This time for communication and dissemination, I think, is a really important point, and it goes back to the discussion earlier about resources. Again, my own experience as a researcher was no sooner had I finished one research project than I was off to frame the next one and get the bid in, and then actually having the time to do the work that is, you know, the accessible blogs, the articles, the conference presentations, etc. Isn't always available.
Mark, your hand's up.
Mark.
I was just kind of responding to what you were saying about there's no time and resource for dissemination because the research team has moved on. We were discussing that as an R&D department yesterday. We were looking at participant responses to the patient research experience survey, and the only black mark for us as a department was some participant saying, I was not sure when I was going to find out about the results of the study. And the team was saying, why can't funders allocate an additional 10% of resource for that dissemination period, so that, as you say, we could develop those digital resources, those accessible resources, which we've all got on our to-do list, but rarely happens. Really frustrating.
It's a really, really good point. And actually, you've also made a very good point there, Mark, about disseminating research findings back to those who've participated in the research. been doing a piece of work in the centre actually specifically looking at EDI issues in patient and public involvement, and one of the sort of loops we don't get right is feeding back the outcomes of research to build the trust of research and research communities. So it's an incredibly important area.
I'm going to just draw this question to a close and move on to the third one. I will show the mural at the end. So Claire, I think that's then you.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, so our final question is really kind of, and we've talked about this earlier on in the various presentations, was just what could NIHR, what NIHR support, resources and or tools would help you to achieve these things. And just looking at, I'm just looking at the mural, I feel like some of the things, a couple of things mentioned already in question 2 would kind of overlap with question 3 as well. Even kind of around training and even a repository, as Candice mentioned, as well as a resource. But I really like I really like that suggestion there that's up already, is make health pages visible and talked about, and shift the emphasis on salutogenesis, on how to, you know, support well-being instead of just focusing on problems on society. I think that's a really nice thing. And the other point about have a single go-to place for impact support materials, I think that's one of the emerging findings that is coming out of our strategic review as well, as having, you know, making the resources that we have more visible and available and having them in one place so that they're easy accessible to people.
I've just shared the mural for those of you who can see it, and thank you for those putting things in the chat as well. And just I think this is, you know, we can take copies of this, and Claire and Candice, you might find this particularly useful for your thinking and RDS colleagues, but we can gather this. There was a comment in the chat as well about the particular challenges for ECRs in all of this, because I think, you know, they have the steepest learning curve around understanding what it is to be an academic as much as anything else, or to be a researcher or be a clinician, or whichever part they're in. And what we're seeing in there is a lot of, you know, capacity building, reducing bureaucracy, language, as you were saying, Candice, about language and you know, how we communicate. I'm loving on the, just to jump back to the first question, sorry, the happier, healthier people. I think that is just the most glorious expression of impact we could possibly have, about midway down the page. So if I just scroll over slightly, and just sticking to your third question for a moment, there's clearly a strand in here around visual, digital. I love the videos can be ghastly if not done well, and I think we've all seen those really rather awkward, kind of makes me feel like kind of 1970s Open University, BBC Two, you know, the talks.
Especially at the part of the pandemic, I think.
Sorry. Yeah, I think, yeah, we know what good looks like, and we also know that there's an increasing community of people who are really good at this, and to be, you know, brought into the fold. So if I just scroll down, so there's a support for early career researchers.
To have time out, I think that's really good.
Yeah.
Important point.
So access to success stories, that one's just being written up at the moment.
Yeah, and having dedicated funding for this as well. I think we've already touched on that.
Does this chime, or Claire and Candice, does this chime with your thinking in the strategy development stuff that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Candice, did you?
Yeah, I was saying it does, but it actually gives it some really useful flesh on the bones, as it were, because I think, not surprisingly, we've been thinking about things at a relatively high level, and these are some really practical, tangible examples here. Just quickly to touch on the infographics point, we've been experimenting with that in the centre, and the one of our alerts in particular that we did an infographics for has had one of the biggest reaches of the alerts. It definitely does facilitate getting messages out, though I have to say doing it has taught us it isn't easy to do at all, and certain findings.
Yeah, it's really skilled, isn't it?
It is very skilled, and certain findings lend themselves better than others, and I think you can try to bite off more than you can chew with that. I think to be clear about actually, and it goes back to the I think a point of sort of crystallizing findings down into a very clear point. If you've got that, then they work really well.
Just say I'm loving the wonderful politeness of someone who's apologized for deleting someone else's post. I mean, that's just glorious. I am utterly transfixed by that. I think it's fabulous.
But I think you can recover it by clicking the, but I don't know what happens if you click the return or whatever this sort of button, sort of undo button it's called. Yeah, better not try that.
Yeah, I broke the internet with a slow cooker today. I don't think any of us need to be deleting things.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, so we'll keep putting those on there. We've got kind of 10 minutes in this last bit. What I'm going to do is just kind of scroll back over to the first bit and do a kind of a couple of key points on there, and then we'll have a quick discussion. So what's clearly coming out from it, unsurprisingly, is a real passion for people, patients, making better choices, having better care, and kind of variations thereof. So faster care, better care, etc., etc. And social inequalities. You know, there's a lot of this kind of you know, leveling the playing field for people and so on, and that's not a surprise at all. What I'd invite you to do is think about, from the thing you do, in what way do you contribute to those? And that's where you start getting into an impact literacy mindset. If I just quickly look at question 2, I mean, we've obviously had quite a wide conversation already about comms and so forth, and 2 and 3 definitely overlap. But these things about meaningfulness and trust are coming there, kind of the credibility, all of that comes in there, that, you know, we can do all of these things and we're really getting good as a sector, but I think we still need to work quite hard to get through to people, either because it's a trust thing or because, you know, some people don't have the space in their life to listen or whatever it is. So, you know, come back to Mark's point earlier about where there are barriers to things. We can do really well, we just need to make sure that really well lines up with what people's realities are. And there's so many points in there. Thank you so much for those. And then just the last one we already said, you know, this kind of slightly, you know, innovating, having support from NIHR around resources, capacity to be creative, all of those kind of things, and awareness with RDS. I think awareness of impact help from the RDS. I think that's fantastic. You know, that visibility, that increased visibility of the RDS. I like the thank you that the back button works and it's reinstated. This is a learning point for me as well, and dedicated funding and things. So huge amounts there. Thank you so much for that. Let's open the floor for anyone who has comments. I'll leave this on my screen. I may not be able to see who is putting hands up, so I'll ask colleagues to do that. Has anyone got anything they want to comment on, add? Thanks for those who put things in chat as well. We'll make sure they're featured in this version. That's really helpful.
I was very impressed by this comment by Candace, and I think I put it somewhere, this issue about the strength of the evidence. And as a psychologist stroke social scientist, I'm very mindful of that. It's not only in the social science psychology end of research, but perhaps a bit more so. The results are often very equivocal, and while people find effects, they're often very weak, and actually they are often over-egged in terms of the practical implications. So I thought this need for, you know, building up evidence and synthesizing it is paramount sometimes before you can actually ask for impact. Beyond adding to the evidence base. And I sometimes wonder whether at the moment there is such pressure on creating impact that we try all sorts of things as academics to create impact just to tick boxes, you know, with our employers, etc. I don't know whether any of the speakers would want to comment on that.
Just quickly, I think I would certainly agree. We have a lot of that pressure to do it, and I think people are talking about varied journeys and mysteriousness of impact, that we sometimes we're trying to force impact out of things that can't have impact. Sometimes we're trying to get impact out of things that isn't cooked enough. Sometimes things are cooked and people don't, you know, are too humble to promote it. We've got every dynamic in the system. So something about understanding proportionate, evidence, all of those kind of things. It's got to be part of the mix. But sorry, anyone else?
I think that's a good term, this proportionate. Yeah, I think I like that. Mark was trying to come in.
I'm just picking up on your comment, Jorg, about how sometimes quite weak evidence and weak findings make their way into the literature and are heralded in a way that's disproportionate to the strength of the evidence. And I think that's really frustrating. I notice it in my community, and I notice that there's some very big research engines behind publicizing these findings and suggesting that they are a lot stronger than is the case. And yeah, as a community, we need to kind of call this research out and just draw attention to the weaknesses, because the point I was making earlier today about improving the quality of research, I think there are lots of methodological improvements that I've noticed in my field. So publishing protocols, identifying primary outcomes, methodologically, I think there's a lot more rigor, a lot more transparency, and we need to call out when I think there is a sense of spinning at the end of the process, despite that transparency, because it's there for us all to see that the findings are not quite how they're made out to be, and we just need to be prepared to name that.
I completely agree, Mark. I think we have so much flooding at people, and as I say, as a patient, the amount of stuff I get, I'm a vascular patient, so the amount of stuff I see, there's this, there's this. How can I possibly know as a patient which is relevant, which is appropriate, which is safe, those things? And there's that need for trusting our clinical and academic colleagues that they will essentially sift it for us. I know it's not quite the same thing, but I think it feels along the same line. So I absolutely agree with you. Anyone else? We've got the last couple of minutes in this. I can see lots of things. There's a point someone's made there about political, being cynical and political. I think there is always a risk that things become politicized because that's the strategy, that's the priority, and so forth. And it can be rather exhausting to hold the line of what's meaningful if you're in that position. And perhaps there's something in there for NIHR about helping people hold the line a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID has shown a lot about this, where, research, very poor research has received enormous coverage on Twitter, etc., and fostered whatever, zero COVID strategies or anti-vax strategies. It's quite an interesting illustration of extreme effects in a crisis situation, admittedly.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't want to interfere, Julie, Claire, and Candace, but we could just sort of move on to a sort of final conversation, questions and answers, or also practical questions, which some people in the room may have. Sort of, I think we don't need to sort of have a, I think we can be quite fluid. At least that's how I would approach it.
I think we're hitting a natural endpoint on this bit, and I would just like to, Candace and Claire, feel free to jump in, but I think I'd probably say on our joint behalf, thank you to everybody for adding so many things and just so many points that are incredibly well made. And these we'll download, have a look at them, and so forth. Thank you so much for that. Hopefully you can see something in there that sparks your own interest as well. I will stop sharing my screen, and Jorg, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, well, I would just like to thank everybody who participated or who just watched for the cursors going around. It's quite good fun, I thought. And I think it's actually a good tool, but that's not here. We are not evaluating software. So I think many thanks really to Julie, Candace, and Claire to running this workshop, this interactive workshop, which we are not that many anymore. There's still 36 people on the call, but I think it worked very, very well. And it's now probably a good summary of a lot of the issues which are relevant in impact. Anyway, I think we just we don't have to use up all the time, but if there are additional questions or topics or something which hasn't been covered so far and somebody's really interested in bringing up, please feel free and raise your voice or raise your hand and then raise your voice. Anybody with who would like to ask a question or comment? Well, oh yes, Sabina.
You know, I'm always
Yeah, you are reliable, but that's great.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is just, I think it was Julie that was talking about the ref case studies, and I would like, exactly to have a little bit more, not just access, because those are free, but what you don't have, of course, is an understanding of which are the good ones and which are not, because the scores is not visible. But, often the best way to understand how to do something well is by seeing, how something good is well done. And I just had this one, I remember this one that I read one time that was about, I think it was in Birmingham, it was about, putting the Samaritans poster, for suicide prevention on the bridge itself, and then measuring, literally the number of, fewer deaths that there were on that specific. And it kind of, and I know that is on an extreme, because that's very practical, is behavioral change and whatever else. But yeah, I would like, a few signposted, because that's my opinion of what was, a good impact case study that I saw. But then, who knows, maybe it wasn't that good. But so yeah.
So quick come back to that if I can. I think I would share your view on learning the various things. I think there are some, what makes a better, what makes a worse one, although we're still unpicking this recent ref and how we judged it and all of those things. So a lot of that will come. But I think one of the things that perhaps has been not overt in this talk is social care. We've talked about health a lot, and it's social care where I think we've got the biggest gap, I suppose, in understanding what works. So talk about, for example, if you want, training for care home staff generally don't have access to computers in the working day. So it's kind of, people say, it's posters on the back of the door, it's that kind of thing. So I think we need to rethink what the world we're looking at in terms of where our research is supposed to land. What does access, what does use look like there? And that generally hasn't come out of case studies. So there's some marriage between those two that I would absolutely agree with you on.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, the other issue that, is the issue of reach, which I always have in mind. And it doesn't mean that a good, case study or a good piece of research has to be, reaching the whole of the world population. So reach really is within what's your target. And often that message gets lost, isn't it? But again, REF is quite good in those sense, in actually, keeping people, sort of in line, and forcing you people to think, if you just want to reach and your target population is your local community, then you can reach, sort of 100% impact. And, again, as you were saying earlier, that's just a metric, it's about how we measure, but sometimes there's some good, sort of lessons, I think, to be picked up just by those, sort of ways of measuring in terms of unpacking the meaning, because it's always difficult to, anyway.
I'll drop the 2014 case study link into the database. We don't have the new one yet, but I'll put that in if anyone wants to look at case studies from that. I know it's slightly different.
Yeah. My point was, anybody that maybe knows for sure which ones are good can share that, because some institution have, if you are within your institution, you can see out of the ones you put out which ones go a 4-star or not. Others can't do that. So a little bit of help, that would be great. Thank you.
And that's something which we actually, in terms of the definition of a reach, we asked in our response to the consultation, we asked for further clarification around that, or further efforts to emphasize that point, really, to, I suppose, to help ensure a future exercise doesn't discourage local impacts or things like rare disease research from being undertaken, given the variation, the way in which impact is interpreted as well. So, and another thing that we kind of emphasized as well is that just, they should kind of clarify up front that it is really kind of positive impact, and the majority, they're all positive impact case studies you're getting, where we're really interested in, kind of learning what's not working as well. And so we can learn and improve from that as well. So,
I think I've described impact case studies that are submitted as glossy competition entries once on a blog, because and that's not to do a disservice to what's in them. The effort is incredible. Don't get me wrong. You'll hear nothing other than that from me. But it's true that the documents are a 5-page summary of the shiniest things you can say. So I don't always caution in what you're seeing as the positives. I always caution in that looking like a model of what it looks like to do impact.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
Yeah,
and I know we've talked about that quite a lot, Claire, in the past.
Yeah, no, and those case studies we'll be doing. We'll be diving into those case studies ourselves to pull on them to use ourselves internally to make the case to for NIHR as well, and to build on the case studies we have as well. So they're a really rich resource. But I think it's always the caveat that it's not everything. I'm always interested in hearing about those case studies that didn't make the threshold, that were just not because they weren't good, but just that selection process or kind of, there's a whole vast range of case studies that didn't make the cut, but not because they weren't 4-star or anything like that. So I'm always conscious of that.
Sarah.
I was just going to say exactly the same as Claire. So I work for an institution as an impact manager. We've done exactly the same kind of thing. So we're really interested as well in sort of promoting the impact that wasn't returned to ref, not because it wasn't any good or it might not just fit the criteria exactly, but looking at the journeys. And I think that was some of the stuff that came up in the boards about how they actually got there and what are the processes. So what K involvement, what public engagement, what funding did they receive? It might be NIHR, it might be other funders, and how did they sort of achieve all of that? And we're very passionate about trying to broaden our case studies. I keep saying case studies and I'm like, Julie, everyone thinks ref, and I'm going, no, I don't mean a ref, it's more than ref. So we're trying to anyone's got any ideas what I can call them? A library? I don't know. If I call them case studies, everyone gets fixated on ref, which is not what I'm aiming for them to be. But yeah, I just thought I'd echo that point.
Share your pain. I think impact stories is one of them. There's all sorts. It's all basically everyone just hears impact case studies, so it kind of doesn't matter whether you call it an impact chandelier, they'll still hear case study.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think I suggest we call a close to the meeting, and I would want to, above all, before I forget it, I would want to say really a very big thank you to Anya, to Helen, to Kate, and many others who really did a lot of work and burned the midnight oil almost. Maybe they did in getting the show on the road, and it all worked very, very smoothly. So thank you very much. And equally, I would like to thank all the speakers, Mark, Julie, Claire and Candace, for really great talks, sticking to the times given, or even being a little bit shorter, which is great, rather than having to sit nervously and trying to not interrupt, but interrupting speakers. It's always, I find that quite stressful. And and I think the workshop worked very well. So we will share things with you as promised. That will probably take a little bit of time, but it shouldn't take long. And as a very last thing, I just want to, share my screen once more. And this is, I think, can you see this is, I think, the whole screen, but it doesn't perhaps matter. It's now what can you see? I think it's, hang on one sec, I'll try again. Find the right slide. I think here we are. So this, you should see the forthcoming event. So there will be a social care webinar, and it's all at very short notice. It's a national webinar run jointly with the program office RFP of the Research for Patient Benefit and Social Care. Details all to be announced, but just check out our website for the other events. We are really very active and I think a lot of the seminars and workshops and meetings are all of great help and much appreciated by many. So if you haven't tried them, do join us.